I'm afraid that anyone who goes on multi-day adventures around the west coast of Scotland will sooner or later encounter rough seas, despite forecasts predicting good weather. It's all part of the joys of boating. I don't often intentionally go out in strong winds, but sometimes I do, just to keep my hand in and to know my own capabilities. The month of June had a lot of wet and windy days, which kept me landlocked, until I decided, hell, I'm going to sea regardless. A forecast of winds from the northwest, reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour, meant I had to plan carefully as long open sea crossings were out. I decided on spending a few days in Loch Linnhe, assuming I could cross to the far side, which would be sheltered by the Morven Hills and an offshore wind. A simple plan, but one I knew would have rough water crossing to the Werra shore. I launched my boat at Kelly's Pier, then left it tied to the pier wall, as I took the car and trailer home before walking back to the boat. That way I could stay away as long as I wished, and no one would wonder why my car was abandoned on the shore. It was a blistery morning as I started up the outboard and clambered on board, but at least I knew Loch Linnhe would be sheltered from strong winds. I took things easy for the first few minutes, to allow the outboard to heat up, to check its telltale, and to attach my kill cord. Then I was off, heading down the loch for my latest adventure. I was filming with the GoPro cameras, as they are waterproof and I knew they would need to be on this trip. I carried full camping gear, beer and food for 4 days, but knew I could get more supplies if I wanted to stay away longer. Soon I was leaving the sheltered waters of Loch Linnhe and heading for the Linn of Lorn, which I expected to be a bit rougher, as I was now approaching open sea. Heavy grey clouds hung in the sky, but at least it was dry, apart from some flying spray. I was glad there wasn't a swell, well, at least in the shelter of Ardmucknish Bay. The waves began to build the further out I went, but I knew they couldn't get too big as soon as I'd be in the shelter of Lismore Island. It did, however, get very much wetter. But then they started to recede the closer I got to Lismore's weathered shore. Until finally I was in calm waters again. The wind was still as strong, but it can't form any waves until it gets further out, where it was still just as rough. I enjoyed a smooth passage along the southeast coast of Lismore, but I also knew it would be short-lived once I left the shelter of the island. In truth, I knew it would be even more of a bouncy ride, crossing the 3.5 miles of Loch Linnhe to reach the sheltered shore of Morven. I took comfort in the fact that once across, I could relax in shelter seas, as long as the wind continued to blow from the northwest. And as I expected, as soon as I left the shelter of the land, the sea began to pick up. GoPro cameras tend to flatten waves due to the nature of their wide-angle lens, but I guesstimate the waves were around 4 feet in height, and mid-channel had a lot of breaking tops. Of course, in more open waters, the waves would have been much bigger. However, the wave size are dependent on how far the wind can blow them, which in this instance is only 3.5 miles. That doesn't mean I wasn't taking a pounding. The bow GoPro camera gives a better indication of just how rough it is being in 4 feet high waves. Although I was happy enough heading straight into the heavy seas, I would not like to travel any great distance beam on, in other words sideways to the waves. Then, as expected, the waves flattened as I gained the shelter of the hills of Morven, which meant I could now relax and enjoy a more peaceful journey. But first I wanted my lunch, so landed on the stony Morven shore. Looking out to sea, it looked quite peaceful, which is why it's important to know offshore winds can be deceptive. It was still as rough mid-channel. To work up an appetite and to loosen stiff limbs, I took a short walk, taking time to smell the foxgloves. I then took a nosy around the ruins of an 18th century state house, abandoned long ago and now inhabited by a flock of wagtails. I gave him a crumb or two from my sandwich before heading back to the boat and continuing on my way. It was now a lovely summer day, boating quietly in the shelter of the hills. But every so often I was reminded the wind was still blowing around 30 miles per hour, especially when I crossed the entrance to Loch Linnhe. The little hamlet of Camas-na-Crois is the last sign of human habitation in this part of the Morven coast, which feels very remote. The sun came and went as I made my way up the coast. It was certainly not cold. Some seals basked sleepily on rocky reefs. I started scanning the coastline, looking for a suitable campsite for the night, and found the perfect spot in a little out-of-the-way bay, miles from anywhere. I also knew my boat would be perfectly safe, anchored overnight in the offshore wind. However, I knew it would be exposed to the element if the wind shifted to the southwest. I settled down for a coffee and then cooked my supper while admiring the views. After my meal, I decided to spend an hour or so trawling a rapala lure along the shore, but as usual, never caught anything worth eating. So I spent the rest of the evening walking beside a stream, which was not far from the tent. I then went to sleep, but awoke around midnight to some strange noises around the tent. I looked out but saw nothing, although it was not dark. The sun never really sets at this time of year. I presumed it was some seal swimming in the bay. I dozed on and off all night, not convinced that it was seal, and in the morning when I got out the tent I discovered what it was. I heard the feral goats stood glowering at me. They completely surrounded my sleeping area, and were even in the hills behind the tent. If looks could kill, I would have been a dead man, but fortunately they didn't attack, although they watched my every move as I packed everything away and went on my way. It was a lovely sunny morning to explore Loch Linnhe, and the offshore winds had died quite considerably. So my plan for the day was to head through the Corn Narrows, go past Fort William and turn into Loch Linnhe. Then just follow my nose thereafter. The navigation beacon at Salacan Point warns of shallow water on the approach from the south. While over on the right-hand side, Ballyhoolish Bridge crosses the entrance to lovely Loch Linnhe. The Corran Lighthouse indicates the start of the Narrows, where a fierce tide race runs through the channel. It's here where the car ferry crosses the Narrows, and I was pleased to see a van driving down the slipway, indicating that the ferry was not ready to sail. I learned a long time ago that commercial boats always have right of way over small pleasure boats. Now in the upper basin of Loch Linnhe, I settled down to enjoy the views. The wind was beginning to get up again as I approached Fort William, but as it was behind me, it was easy going. Then headed for Corpach, where the Caledonian Canal starts or ends, depending on how you look at it. Corpach has fantastic views of Ben Nevis, which at 1,345 metres is the highest mountain in the UK. I then turned west into a narrow channel that connects Loch Linnhe with Loch Linnhe. I was delighted to find that the loch was mirror calm. I floated around Loch Linnhe for a while, before landing for lunch. It was a pure pleasure sitting in the warmth of the sun while scoffing my sandwiches and admiring the views. If it had been a little later in the day, I would have camped overnight here, but I decided to return and push on to Loch Linnhe, thinking the winds of Loch Linnhe had dropped. However, I soon found out that the wind was not only still blowing down Loch Linnhe, but had changed a southerly direction, meaning that I had to fight my way back into it. It shows just how diverse the Scottish weather can be. Loch Linnhe was flat calm, yet 2 miles away Loch Linnhe is blowing a holy. was a little relieved to find the waves drop a little as I neared the Corran Narrows. I was fully aware the tide was ebbing and would be flowing against the blowing southerly wind, which would make the overfalls from a tide race rather interesting. And sure enough, as soon as I was through the Narrows, the waves started to pick up again. Ahead I could clearly see a lot of breaking waves, so I knew I was in for a bouncy ride again. Trying to use the GoPro was a complete waste of time as wave after wave sent flying spray over the side. I wanted to turn left and head for the shelter of Loch Linnhe, but knew turning side on to the waves was not a good idea. They increased in size as they met shallower water. Therefore I was committed to heading straight into the heavy seas until I reached the relative shelter of Kintallen, over 2 miles ahead. The continual salt spray hitting my face was stinging my eyes, so I knew as soon as I considered it feasible I would turn and run for Loch Linnhe. It's at times like this that the bow cover is worth its weight in gold. Its purpose is not to keep water out, but to keep my camping gear in the boat. I had the electric bilge pump running constantly, so there was not much water in the boat despite the amount coming over the sides. Carefully time my lurch forward to coincide with the break in the wave sets, so I could switch the GoPro on and off. One careless move and I knew I could be a man overboard. I made the shelter of the headland at Kintallen, wet but without incidents, and decided it was now safe to turn and run for the shelter of Loch Linnhe. The going was much easier now, but I had a lot more work to do, watching a wave didn't creep up behind and come over the transom, as well as watching the bow of the boat didn't stuff its nose into a wave in front. Once under the Ballachulish Bridge, I knew I was in sheltered waters again. I landed to dry myself out and settled down into looking for a campsite for the night. I hope you've enjoyed the video so far, and it will be continued in part 2. Thanks for watching.